bit, as you can see, about some of the Civil War artifacts that are in his family. And I'll let him explain all that, and then we're done. When we're done with that, we're going to see the movie, the film, Thunder on the Ozarks. Thank you.
Okay, public speaking is not my forte, so please forgive me. Can you hear me?
No.
No?
No.
Yes?
Better. That's better.
Better? No, I can't read it because there's this thing in front of my face. Anyways, this is my great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, Samuel Parks Murray, when he was a lieutenant in the 69th Ohio Company B. And he left behind in the family his sword. And I have better pictures, and when I get down and show them, we'll talk more about parts of the sword. And then he also left behind a lot of paperwork, about 50 items that he created in the field, showing how they accounted for materials, people, and other things. It's just kind of interesting background. He went in as, he entered service as a sergeant in September of '61, quickly rose to a lieutenant in January, then a first lieutenant in August of '64, made a captain in May of '65, and mustered out in July. So he moved up fairly quickly. I don't know how he made from sergeant to second lieutenant in months, but he must have had something. Maybe his beautiful handwriting. All these documents are handwritten. Even the duplicates are handwritten. There are no carbon papers, no nothing. So, and I also found that I had two other great-great-grandparents. I mean, fathers, and one great-great-great-grandfather. There's a father-son combination. They both served in the war, but they were further east. So, I've got to get closer here where I can control the slides, because I didn't have a chance to teach Bonnie. Come on. There we go. There's the sword. Amateur photographer me did these photographies. Oops. Okay, this is engraved on the scabbard. It says Samuel P. Murray, Lieutenant Company B, 69th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, OVI. This is the handle. We have the guard, the pommel, which kind of holds everything together, and the grip, which apparently is shark skin, and that looks right. It said it was common to be used. And it's wound with a copper wire, and it is starting to come apart, so I asked nobody to play with this. I've got to find somebody that knows how to restore it properly. This is just another look at it. This fancy work over here this is a typical of a junior officer's sword. That's up through captain. When you get from major on up, there's a U.S. engraved in this part of it, built into the structure. This little blip at the end is the end of the blade. It tapers down and comes all the way through the handle, and then it's pinned at the end to hold everything together. Now this is on the blade, and etched into the blade is all sorts of fancy little stuff, but in the middle here we can see E pluribus unum. This is on one side of the sword. This crazy groove, I have no idea what it's for, unless it was to work with a metal sheath. But there's a felt puller on both sides, which is just a concave area that's put in there to make the sword lighter. This sword is under 2 pounds. And on the other side, it's very hard to find, there's a U and an S. I don't know if you can make it out. It's almost impossible to make out just looking at the sword with the eyeball, but you got to get the light just perfect. But apparently that's common on all of the swords of the period. This one really doesn't say much. This is a maker's mark, which I haven't been able to identify. Some of the artwork and things indicate it may have come from Germany, but nobody, I can't identify it. Now we're moving into some of the paperwork. And that's all creased, and I didn't want to take the creases out because it's going to start to become 2 pieces instead of 1. So I'm treating it with much care. And blowing it further up has kind of made it harder to read. Anyways, this is an inventory of what they have, like rifles and bayonets and sheaths for the bayonets and knapsacks and haversacks and you name it, all the equipment. So we had to account for what you had. And here's 1,000 rounds of ammunition. And everything is usually who it is, where they were, is well identified. Okay, which one is this? Well, this is a handwritten receipt for provisions. And what struck me for this one, and again, this one did not blow up well, is that the prices were to the 100th of a cent, 100th of a penny. So like 81 pounds of rice was sold at 76/100ths of a cent and totaled $8.17. There's also 160 pounds of bacon for under $12. It shows you where inflation's gone. Here we go. This is a quick medical leave. I can't believe you could do it with that little writing. You sure couldn't today. He just said he had 30 days leave. The physician, and this over here said he got paid. So he got his money. And of course everybody has to sign everything everywhere. Okay, this one I'm going to read because I think it's interesting. He was wounded along the way here, and this is the doctor's report. It's very legible if you see the original. But he says, I certify that I have carefully examined First Lieutenant Samuel P. Murray, 69th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, and find that he is suffering from a gunshot wound of the left side received at the Battle of Jonesboro, Georgia, in September. The ball penetrated chest, fracturing the 9th and 10th ribs, injuring also the lower lobe of the left lung, from which he yet suffers severely after violent exercise and exposure. He is unfit for military duty in the field and should, in my opinion, either be transferred to the Invalid Corps or allowed to resign. It's just kind of an interesting piece of history and how well that was documented. That was the regimental surgeon that signed it. Now he either stayed on, I know he finished the war, I don't think he went on the Invalid Corps, and so he just toughed it out, but of course at this point there wasn't much left. This is now the Invalid Corps consisted of soldiers, I found this kind of interesting, that were no longer fit for frontline duty. And you could move into that and partake. Later, people who could not pass the physical to serve frontline could join the Invalid Corps and serve that way. But the people in the Invalid Corps really didn't like that name because the initials were IC, which stand for everything else in the Army, inspected and condemned. So that was later changed to the Veteran Reserve Corps. Now, you saw that inventory earlier. Well, that went over to DC, and of course, somebody has to look at the paperwork. They look at it, they audit it, and they send back a report that you passed your audit. And this is how the report would have gotten back. This is an envelope that was sent to him in the field, and it was on the 14th Corps, left of the Cumberland. And that somehow found him. Oops, going the wrong way. Okay, at one point there were 3 men under his command that were injured, wounded severely, and they left equipment behind, and they couldn't bring it forward, and he had to account for this. And this is a letter to the ordnance people saying what was left and why, and attesting that everything was true and proper. Now this is part of a monster report. This report was almost 30 inches wide. So this is shows the date he mustered in, his age, and at this point he's mustering out of Company B. That's because over on the other half, he's mustering into Company K and taking a promotion to captain, because the captain over there had resigned after his 3 years service. So this was his chance to move ahead. And down here is his muster out in Louisville, Kentucky at the end of the war. So this must be kind of like our DD-214s that we were getting. I guess since, I know I got one in Vietnam era, I guess it goes back probably to Korea and World War II. I don't know how far back that form goes. And this one was interesting because most of the time, this on the outside, a lot of the forms tells what's inside. Normally it says where. It didn't name a city or where you were. This just said in the field. So he must have been between who knows where and who knows where. And here is some equipment that had to be scrapped, no longer serviceable. So there were 12 of this item and 7 of that and 10 of these, and then it all had to be inspected, had to be signed off by people that inspected it, and then what happened? It was just scrapped. And down here is all, I certify, you know, 2 or 3 people involved for 20 items. You know, it seems excessive. That's kind of the way it went. So this is where Samuel Murray ended up. That's May of 26, he finally died. And he was my grandmother on my father's side, father. And from like 1920 to 26, he lived near or with them, I'm not sure, in Evanston. So my father must have known him. Family never talked about the war or the people in the war. I never heard it over the dinner table. They never wanted to talk about it. Even, I think these people who served never wanted to talk about it. And apparently the government gave them all a little stone to mark their service. if they wanted it. Now this is another one. This is off father's side as well. My same last name. And in fact, my father was a Robert Davidson. But he was started in Illinois, but after the war he moved down to Batavia, Iowa, farmed for about 30 years. And then he moved to Evanston again, kind of near the rest of them, but he's buried down here in southern Iowa. And this is Frank Reeves, which comes off my mother's side. Her mother was a Reeves. And Frank was the younger of two, and he served in the New Hampshire Battery, which is artillery. The battery was normally about 6 guns, and doing that I learned it took about 12 men to run it down. 8 men to actually shoot it, and 4 men to handle the horses, to carry it around. This is light infantry. Now his father was considerably older, and he mustered in Massachusetts for a 9-month tour. And I had his gravestone somewhere, but I can't find it now. And that's basically all I've got. I can handle a few questions because I've got about 5 minutes.
The sword that you talked about, is that a regular Army issue?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't know that the Army had regular issue or not, or whether it would only be senior officers, because junior officers didn't have to have one. This one, I'm sure, was never used. It's never been sharpened. There's no real point on it. There's no edge. So it's more for display, carried around. It's in good shape. Something else over there, I missed it.
Did they issue swords and guns to the soldiers?
There is a place on the inventory sheet for swords, but I think it's for the enlisted. I think some of the enlisted positions could have some.
Oh, so they could use both, yeah.
Yeah. But if I were out there on the battlefield and a man had a Springfield rifle with a bayonet on it, and I only had this, I would much rather have the rifle with the bayonet. I want that reach. Okay, I'll try and get the movie going.
So I really appreciate Dan doing this. We're trying to learn about our new projector, digital projector, and what it will and won't do for us. And so he's doing well, so I appreciate him doing that and getting our movie to run. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit while he's doing that about Thunder in the Ozarks, about the Battle of Pea Ridge, which is the little movie that we're going to see. It was made by the National Park Service about the Battle of Pea Ridge. And the Battle of Pea Ridge was a battle that changed the course of the Civil War. It was fought March 7th and 8th of 1862, and it was a pivotal Civil War battle fought in the northwest corner of Arkansas, and it was near where Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma come together. It resulted in a Union victory. A victory for the South would have been devastating for the government because that would give the South access to St. Louis and control of the entire Mississippi River. And so that would have been really devastating to the North's cause if that were to happen. So this Battle of Pea Ridge is very important to people in this part of Iowa, especially in Jackson County, because the 9th Iowa was there. The 9th Iowa was made up of 10 companies, and Company A was the first company to leave from this area when President Lincoln put out his request for volunteers after Fort Sumter was fired upon. So on September 14th of 1861, 101 Jackson County men joined the other companies of the 9th Iowa in Camp Union, which was in Dubuque. And from there, they gathered there, and then they left to fight for their country. So from Maquoketa, we all have heard the name of Andrew Drips. Andrew Drips was publisher of the Maquoketa Excelsior newspaper, and he was even our postmaster during the time of the Civil War, the early days of the Civil War. And he was the one who raised this company of Jackson County men. He was elected captain of Company A, and Lieutenant Florillo Kelsey of Sebula was his second in command. The people of Maquoketa presented, and this is where you've heard about, we've talked about this sword so much, the people of Maquoketa presented engraved swords to each, Captain Kelsey and, well, Lieutenant Kelsey and Captain Drips as they left to fight for the Union. Company A, almost all Jackson County men, was on the front line of the conflict. They were positioned in front of the Elkhorn Tavern, which you'll see in this movie. Captain Drips, unfortunately, was killed in the very first day of battle with his Maquoketa sword in his hand. And Lieutenant Kelsey then stepped up and took his place as the commander. Captain Drips was 36 years old at that time, and he was buried in a peach grove, I believe, behind this building. And so it was just a really sad thing. Lieutenant Kelsey took command, like I said, and he was wounded. But during that battle, the Battle of Pea Ridge, 7 Jackson County men died and 11 were wounded. And overall, the 9th Iowa suffered 40% of all of the casualties from the North during this battle. So this film tells the story of the battle, and it's featured at the Pea Ridge National Military Park in Arkansas. And displayed at their visitor center is the sword, Captain Drips' sword, that was presented by the people of Maquoketa. Lieutenant Kelsey's sword we got just recently, and that is in our museum on the fairgrounds. And I just want to say how much we appreciate Rich and Helen Rockwar. They visited the battlefield at Pea Ridge and have been there how many times now?
I think 3.
3 times now, going back to check out
4 times.
So there are investigators and there are real people who know what went on. But it was their visit to Pea Ridge that first made us here aware of this really important piece of Jackson County history. If they had not gone to the visitor center there and saw this sword and read about Captain Drips, we might have just never really realized that all of this Jackson County history was there. And I'm grateful for Helen. She got a copy of this film for us, got permission for us to be able to show this to you at Brown Bag Lunch. And so, are we ready?
Yeah.
We hope we can do this.
It started automatically last night. I have to start it now, so
Okay. Aha, success. Thank you, Dan.
Even easier than last night.
Is it going to be loud enough?
Here, can you work the volume? Mine's off.
My name is Asa Payne. After a lapse of 49 years, I again visited the Pea Ridge battlefield. Not the beardless boy who first came here, but an old, gray-bearded man. I was surprised to find how little it had changed. What seemed to be the same old tavern with its elk horns was standing there still, but the barn was gone, and in its place an apple orchard grew. There was nothing to remind me of treacherous days in March of 1862. I belonged to the Confederate 1st Missouri Brigade, soon to be known through the South as the Fighting Missouri Brigade.
Arkansas, 1862. 16,000 determined Confederates march on a collision course with destiny. Proud to be called rebels, they're from Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, and the Indian Territory. Individually, their reasons for volunteering to fight are many and varied. Defense of home and hearth is a primary motivation. Many are willing to stake their lives on the belief that a state has the right to leave the Union if it disagrees with the national debate. For more than 80 years, that debate has swirled around the issue of slavery and whether it should be allowed to expand into new territories and states. 11 southern slaveholding states have seceded to form the Confederate States of America. But Missouri is a border slave state still in the Union, but divided within itself. Asa Payne and his comrades, under the command of Major General Sterling Price, were pushed out of Missouri by occupying federal troops. Now they have joined the Confederate Army of the West to fight their way back home.
On the 4th of March, each man took 3 days' rations, 1 blanket, and 40 rounds of ammunition, and began to march to attack the Yankee General Curtis.
The Yankee General is Brigadier General Samuel R. Curtis, a no-nonsense West Point graduate and a veteran of the Mexican War. Curtis's mission is to secure Missouri for the Union so that its occupying troops can be sent down the Mississippi River to split the Confederacy in half. Curtis's 10,000 federal troops are confident they have just chased the rebels out of Missouri. Proud to be called Yankees, most are farm boys from Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. Many are German immigrants who speak little English. Patriotism is a primary motivation for these young men. Many have staked their lives on the belief that the Union of States is unbreakable, no matter what the debate. Anything else is treason. The destiny of these two armies will be determined on a wide plateau in northwest Arkansas known as Pea Ridge. It is a rugged piece of land with dense underbrush, steep-sided ravines, and thick woods. Running across the Pea Ridge Plateau is Telegraph Road. Sitting astride the road is the Elkhorn Tavern, one of the few homes on Pea Ridge. Perhaps the biggest enemy of both armies is not each other, but something more formidable. The weather. Hoping to catch the Confederates off guard, the Union command chooses to wage a winter campaign. The harsh weather brings driving snow and sub-freezing temperatures. In northwest Arkansas, there is no escape from winter's howling winds and piercing cold. I was so benumbed with cold that I could not cap my pistol, said one young Texan. I tried ever so hard to do so, but had my life depended on it, I could not have succeeded. March 6th, 1862. Curtis chooses his ground. Outnumbered 3-2, The Union Army digs in on bluffs above Little Sugar Creek, a small stream that runs along the south side of Pea Ridge. Lieutenant George Curry of Company C, 59th Illinois, labors with his men to prepare for a rebel attack.
The first order was to build earthworks on this hillside and get artillery into position. It was a most tedious and difficult work.
But that work is in vain. Major General Earl Van Dorn, commander of the Confederate Army of the West, makes a bold decision. Under cover of night, Van Dorn hopes to surprise Curtis by moving his entire army to a position behind the Federal lines. It is a move Van Dorn believes will bring a quick victory. A vain graduate of West Point, Van Dorn is flamboyant, brave to a fault, and full of dreams of glory. For Van Dorn, speed is of the essence. He leaves his wagons behind with blankets, food, tents, and most importantly, reserve ammunition. By this night of March 6th, he has pushed his men to the brink of exhaustion. Private Ephraim Anderson is a volunteer from Missouri.
Our movement was rapid. Some of the men remarking that Van Dorn had forgotten he was riding and we were walking. So hard were the men pressed that some fainted and fell in ranks, completely broke down.
Van Dorn orders his men up a road known locally as the Bentonville Detour. It passes far behind the Union line and connects with Telegraph Road north of Elkhorn Tavern. Through the night and into the early hours of March 7th, Van Dorn marches his entire Army of the West around the entrenched Union Army, unseen and undetected. March 7th, 1862 dawns cold and clear on the Pea Ridge Plateau. As Lieutenant George Curry's soldiers warm themselves with hot coffee, a courier delivers startling news. Van Dorn has succeeded.
Sergeant, come take arms. How had the enemy reached our rear? Had we not worked all night to receive them with our artillery as they approached our front? They had frustrated all our plans.
Van Dorn's plan is to attack the Union rear from the Elkhorn Tavern. But on the morning of March 7th, weary soldiers from Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana, under the command of General Ben McCulloch, are still miles away from the rest of Van Dorn's troops. Van Dorn orders McCulloch to approach the Elkhorn Tavern from the west, a route that takes them perilously close to Union lines. A former Texas Ranger, McCulloch doubts Van Dorn's tactics, but follows orders. Private Will Tunnard of the 3rd Louisiana remembers McCulloch's words from the night before.
As to the approaching battle, he proclaimed, "I tell you, men, the army that is defeated in this fight will get a hell of a whipping."
McCulloch does not realize that a small federal force lurks in the woods, determined to stop his advance.
Fire!
Outnumbered 10 to 1, the Union soldiers from the 1st Missouri Artillery, 3rd Iowa Cavalry, and 1st Missouri Cavalry surprise McCulloch's men. McCulloch unleashes a thunderous cavalry charge. led by General James McIntosh. Arkansas and Texas troops, supported by the 1st and 2nd Cherokee Mounted Rifles, ride roughshod over the Federals. For young Henry Dysart, a Union soldier from Iowa, the Confederate attack is his first taste of combat.
Officers tried to rally the men, but order gave way to confusion. Bullets whizzed by my head like bees. I escaped back to camp.
Outmanned, outgunned, and overwhelmed, the Federal troops break ranks and run for their lives. In June of 1861 at Bull Run, Union troops also retreated in panic. 9 months later, with the embarrassment of Bull Run fresh in their minds, a small group of Union soldiers decide not to run, but to fight. Near a tiny hamlet called Leetown, 2 batteries with the 12th Missouri, 22nd Indiana, and 36th Illinois make a stand. General McCulloch makes plans to destroy the tiny Union force. In 1 hour, they will be ours, he says. Wearing his distinctive black velvet suit, McCulloch decides to personally scout the Union positions. He tells his staff to remain behind. McCulloch is unaware that he is riding into the sights of the 36th Illinois. McCulloch lies dead, a musket ball piercing his heart. Moments later, the next in command, General James McIntosh, is also killed by Union troops. No senior officer remains to give the overall order to advance. The impact of McCulloch's and McIntosh's deaths is enormous. Fully half of Van Dorn's army will remain idle here the rest of the day, waiting for orders which never come. At the base of Elkhorn Mountain lies Morgan's Woods, a tangled mass of underbrush and trees. General Samuel Curtis, the Union commander, has sent outnumbered Indiana and Illinois infantry into the woods to stall the rebel advance. A short distance away, Will Tunnard and his comrades in the 3rd Louisiana wait anxiously for orders. They can hear the sound of distant fighting. Their commander, Colonel Louis Hebert, mistakenly thinks this is McCulloch's attack, so he orders the advance. Will Tunnard and his comrades slowly push forward toward an unseen enemy.
As the line of battle cautiously felt its way through the dense undergrowth, the whole line was opened on with a fire so close and deadly that they wavered and staggered.
For 6 hours, confused, vicious fighting turns Morgan's Woods into a smoky vision of hell. Curtis sends more infantry to drive the rebels out. Amid the horrific chaos, Hebert and his staff are cut off and captured. Thousands of Confederates are now without a leader on this first day of battle at Pea Ridge.
With our forces in confusion, tired and worn down with their long marches, the order was given to fall back.
As the day wears on, Lieutenant George Curry and his men push through Morgan's Woods.
At one place, we came upon 2 wounded men, all day uncared for. They made known their wants and piteous appeals not to bayonet them.
From the fire over here.
They could not realize how we, who had faced them in mortal combat all day, would now stop to assist them.
The valiant stand by Union infantry in Morgan's Woods has far-reaching results. Van Dorn will receive no help from what is left of McCullough's wing. 2 miles to the east, another battle is raging.
Fire! Fire!
It is at the Elkhorn Tavern where the Battle of Pea Ridge will be decided. Van Dorn's plan is to take the Elkhorn Tavern. But to take the tavern means his men must scale the heights that rise above the steep wooded ravine known as Cross Timber Hollow. Curtis sends more troops past the tavern and down into the hollow. Union troops stall the rebel advance. Among the Union reinforcements is the 9th Highland and Private Vincent Holman, just 20. He keeps a daily journal for his sweetheart, Matilda Peyton, who made him a warm vest, which only recently arrived.
The rebels' cannonballs began to fly like hail around our heads. We began to think we was going into action in good earnest.
The rugged terrain has helped the outnumbered Federals slow Van Dorn's push up Telegraph Road. Fighting the steep incline and a hail of Union bullets, the 1st Missouri Brigade claws its way towards the Elkhorn Tavern. With them is young Asa Payne.
We advanced in line of battle along each side of the gulch. I remember hearing zip, zip all around and could see dust flying out of the trees. The limbs and twigs seemed in commotion from concussion of the guns.
Asa Payne and his Missouri comrades storm out of the hollow.
At the head of the gulch, the Elkhorn Tavern and a large barn were in plain view. When we reached the top of the ridge, the Federal line fell back to the tavern and across a field beyond.
The enemy poured out of the brush onto us by the thousands. We held our own as long as we could. Then, the order was to retreat.
By the end of the battle's first day, Elkhorn Tavern lies in the hands of the exuberant rebels. Having pushed out the exhausted and outnumbered Federals, Van Dorn is content to stop and regroup. He is confident that tomorrow will bring complete victory. Through the cold, clear night, Curtis quietly shifts more troops toward the Elkhorn Tavern. Both Confederate and Union soldiers share the same experiences, aching for food and sleep, searching for missing comrades, fearful about tomorrow. Lieutenant George Curry.
A full moon and a clear sky shed its beams directly on the upturned faces of the dead, rendering them still more ghastly and making their gray clothes almost white in the moonlight. To those soldiers, weary, chilled, and despondent, moonbeams never made a scene more cold or cruel.
Beneath that same moon, the ghastly scenes leave an indelible impression on Ephraim Anderson, a young rebel fresh out of Missouri and far from home.
The moon was shining, and her pale light reflected from the white flint rocks showed distinctly the stains and pools of blood. In places, the surface was sprinkled over with blood. The wounded had been removed, and the dead were lying in every attitude.
The stillness of the night is pierced only by the cries of the wounded.
It's okay, soldier. It's okay. It's okay.
Having spent the entire day in the cramped cellar, Lucinda and Joseph Cox now help with the injured soldiers. Their home, the Elkhorn Tavern, is transformed into a makeshift hospital. It is full of shattered men.
Fractured ribs. All in there.
Painkillers like morphine and opium are running low.
Chloroform and sponge.
Sterilization has yet to be invented. The men are lucky if doctors wash their hands between operations, usually to amputate limbs. The soft lead bullets of the times shatter bone and leave little choice. The smell is sickening. One soldier at Pea Ridge remarked that there is no more agonizing a place during battle than a field hospital.
Next patient.
Dawn, March 8th, 1862. Waves of blue uniforms move to the front as Union General Samuel Curtis masses his entire army for a bold counterstroke. In a crucial move, he places 21 of his remaining cannon on a high piece of ground known today as Wellflea's Knoll.
Ready?
It is a strategy that will turn the tide of the battle at Pea Ridge.
Fire! 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 Fire!
The fierce cannonade is the most intense artillery bombardment yet seen in the war. With deadly precision, the Union artillery pounds the rebels. It was a continual thunder, wrote an Iowan. A fellow might have believed that the day of judgment had come. Asa Payne and his comrades at the Elkhorn Tavern are overwhelmed by the federal firepower.
Bark and dirt was flying off the trees all around, and the cannonballs and grape shot and mini balls sang like hummingbirds and bees.
At the end of the first day of battle, Van Dorn was confident complete victory was at hand. Now, some 18 hours later, the Union's crushing artillery barrage and infantry assault drive the Confederates from the field. The rebels feel cheated and betrayed by their commander. In his crusade for glory, Van Dorn committed an unforgivable tactical error. Supply wagons containing reserve ammunition were left far behind 2 days before. His men have little left with which to fight. None of them know it yet, but they had been part of the largest Confederate army that would ever be raised west of the Mississippi, only to fail. Curtis knows that the Battle of Pea Ridge has been won. Missouri is now secure. The balance of power in the West has shifted to the Union. And yet, the cost of victory is staggering. More than 1,100 Union soldiers have been killed or wounded. Confederate casualties are even greater. Over 2,000 rebel soldiers are counted among the dead and wounded on the Pea Ridge battlefield. Private Vincent Holman survives the battle, only to die in camp 9 months later of jaundice. His sweetheart marries one of his comrades in the 9th Iowa. Lieutenant George Curry and Private Henry Dysart survived the war to leave accounts of the Battle of Pea Ridge, soldier stories of suffering, sacrifice, and victory. trusted again by the men under his command. He is killed by a jealous husband 14 months later. Will Tunnard and Ephraim Anderson survived the war to leave their accounts of the Battle of Pea Ridge. Soldier stories of suffering, sacrifice, and defeat. Young Asa Payne of the 1st Missouri Brigade comes through the war as well. Nearly 50 years later, he returns to Pea Ridge, the Elkhorn Tavern, and the echoes of a mighty conflict. Old Asa Payne remembers when the teenage mother of Francis Cox was serving water to the wounded the first time he had come here. He has returned to remember. Once an insignificant roadside inn, the Elkhorn Tavern now stands as a monument to the lives lost here in the turning point of the Civil War in the Trans-Mississippi West.
While seated on its porch, beyond the eastern hills, the full moon rose like a copper disk and shed its light just as 50 years before over the bloody field. But all was quiet. The booming of cannon and the wails of the wounded were hushed forever. I was lulled to sleep by the tinkling of cowbells and was awakened only by the hoot of owls, which seemed to me were hooting their last long hoot in memory of the past.
Because without them, I don't think we would have known this great story and how much Jackson County blood was spilled on that battlefield. But Helen's done an amazing amount of research at the other building, and this one here, we've got a lot of her research about the battle. You're welcome to come and look at that. And we have there's been a book written about the Battle of Pea Ridge that's up here also. So anyway, thank you for coming, and thank you all. If anybody has any questions, I bet Helen can answer them. Some, not all.
Show your tickets.
That's right. And as Dan says, we do have tickets. We do have tickets to the Saturday night dinner and dance, if anybody would like to get your tickets now. So we would appreciate your support for sure. And Muster on the Macopa is drawing close. It's going to be quite an event. We've heard that we have more cavalry coming, there'll be horses and cannons and all kinds of neat things on Saturday and Sunday. Thank you.